welcome to this month in gaming history as it's April 1994 and after a busy March 1994, this month isn't quite as busy, but there was one massive release to kick us off, and that is what this is. Final Fantasy VI, if you can't tell by the fancy Mode 7 introduction here, on the Super Famicom, released in April 1994, kind of the peak of, well, some people feel it's the peak of Final Fantasy in general. A lot of people will hold Final Fantasy VII and put that into that spot, probably because it was the most popularist, I guess. Certainly in the West, it was the game that most people played on PlayStation. But I think a lot of sort of fans hold Final Fantasy VI as the best in the series. Even though I'm not a Final Fantasy guy, I kind of think Final Fantasy VI is at least the most appealing to me. Though not the one I played the most. I played a lot of Final Fantasy VIII and then just couldn't bring myself to finish it, just because of just my taste in gaming from the get-go. But I think Final Fantasy VI had such this steampunk aesthetic to everything, and the pseudo-future stuff rather than the standard. And yeah, I think it just kind of took more risks, I think, with design, if not the actual visual design, if not the actual gameplay, where I think most of its systems were not too different from Final Fantasy V, which is another game that people really hold up. It's still it's the same turn-based active time battling that people were used to from, did those guys in? That people were used to from prior Final Fantasies, but yeah, I think it was the setting that a lot of people get into. And this was at the peak of Square's chummy relationship with Nintendo. And well, I suppose that the real peak was when Square would be brought in, as we're going through basically combat tutorials here. Not that we'd be able to get too far into the game, in just this quick video here, but Bosh. Just walking around in steampunk robots is always grand. There we go. Yeah, I suppose the real peak of Square's relationship with Nintendo was actually in 1995, when Square were brought in to make Super Mario RPG for Nintendo. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe these days when Nintendo has such a weak relationship with third parties, that Nintendo were very strong and had incredibly strong relationships with third parties in the Super Nintendo era, with not just Square but with Capcom as well, and other third parties. And yeah, this was the peak of, this was approaching the peak of their relationship in the mid-90s, and of course Nintendo were very close to forming plans for what would go on to become the Nintendo 64, where rather than going with CDs, which is what Sony were doing and what Sega were doing, Nintendo chose to stick with cartridges for the N64, and that just it screwed Square's plans for Final Fantasy VII, and they just kind of said, well, no, we're going to take Final Fantasy and all of our properties to the PlayStation then, if you don't mind. And that was a huge loss for Nintendo, which I think to an extent today Nintendo is still paying for the sins of the choices they made with the N64, or the choices they made with the N64 are what kind of shaped and defined Nintendo today. Yeah, so bloody hell. Bloody hell. I mean, it's showing us the different things, like the fact that you have to be careful of positioning. You can get caught in a pincer and then you'll be screwed, and you should all be facing the right way. Never mind. Let's just get through this. It's always so hard to do RPGs in this series of videos because we never get very far. But yeah, Final Fantasy as well, a rarity, or Final Fantasy VI, a rarity in RPG land as a JRPG that actually got localized into the West. And of course, you know, with some slight chronological tinkering and screw-ups, because even though this was Final Fantasy VI in Japan, it was only the third Final Fantasy to be brought across to the West. We must defend the minds. Oh god, yeah, great. So this was known as Final Fantasy III on release. Heck, getting snowed under by these woolly mammoths. Yeah, so yeah, the chronologically confusing Final Fantasy series, because when Final Fantasy VII came out on the PlayStation, that came out in the West as well, obviously. It's a great success. It was known as Final Fantasy VII, and then everything kind of went backward, and then Sony caught, Square caught onto the fact that they could resell all of their old games. And eventually Final Fantasy VI got re-released on the PlayStation as Final Fantasy VI and Game Boy Advance as well. There's a few little differences between the Japanese Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy III. Mainly it's a couple of characters that you summon are slightly less skimpily dressed. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same game. And yeah, it's good, and it was recently, of course, brought over in that hey, let's resell all of our old games spirit. It was recently brought over to iOS and Android, so you can pick up that version. Of course, as is the one with you know, redone games of this era, it was rejiggered with new sprites that were, you know, a lot of people say lack the character of these chunky sprites, and certainly I think Final Fantasy VI is a very distinctive looking game, and it's a very sort of technically for the time impressive game, and it stands up very well visually today. So there's, you know, you can understand when, you know, fairly iconic art gets tinkered with, a lot of people get upset. But yeah, I mean, if you just want to play the game and you're not too fussed about what it looks like, then you can check out Final Fantasy VI on your mobile devices if you so desire. But yeah, before we get too far into the mines, I guess we'll we'll move on to the next series of releases. There's an awful lot of combat. Wow. In the first 7 minutes of Final Fantasy VI. I think back to the briefing. Oh no. There you go. So yeah, I mean that's what you're doing. It's there's some nice sort of tutorializing in a way where I think later Final Fantasy games would they would double down on the very dry text-based tutorial that will explain all of its systems. Certainly, I mean, like games like Final Fantasy 13 that were tutorializing you until really far into the game, from what I understand. And this is kind of at least teaching you about what you should do through gameplay. And no, don't. Oh, it's gonna eat the energy. Never mind. That was stupid, wasn't it? No. Oh, now I'm dead. well, that's sketch naked. But yeah, I'm not a fan of JRPGs in general, just because of turn-based combat just really does my head in. But still, there's a very sort of clear reason why people enjoy Final Fantasy VI above, over and above the other games in the series, and I can completely understand that. So yeah, let's move on from the extremely popular Final Fantasy VI to a slightly less popular but still interesting release on Nintendo's console in April 1994. So there must have been some other really big console release in April of 1994. Well, there was a couple of sports games, and there was Liberty or Death on the Super Nintendo again. Actually on Mega Drive as well, and PC, but this is the Super Nintendo version. Actually a little bit of a cheat. This came out in Japan in March, but March was so busy that this Curio Liberty or Death we skipped last month. And yeah, well, this is an odd one because it's a game about the American Civil War. Actually handled by Koei, who, well, I mean, they're known for their historical simulations, but no safe data. Wait, I hate. There you go. Yeah, they're known for their historical simulations, but usually historical simulations that take place in the Asian sort of field, as is their want and as is their location. So it's interesting. This company that is and still is known for things like Nobunaga's Ambition and Kessen, Remembrance of the Three Kingdoms, things like that. Actually, in '94, long forgotten now, sort of handled, a game about the American taking on the British. So you can choose to have a look at the Americans, and in which case you are playing George Washington here, and say nay to him because I'm a foul Brit. So we're gonna go with Thomas Gage. They've each got different stats, and yeah, this is a very slow, drawn out strategy game that you can play with one or two players. We want wait time to be fast. Thank you very much. Let's see what battles there are, and animation, things like that. There you go. I definitely need advice. And yes, I suppose. You can also watch the Super Nintendo play itself if you so desired. Yeah, it's a game about primarily building up your military might, and it's a game where you see a screen like that and you go, oh fuck, oh no, this is one of those games. And yeah, Nobunaga's Ambition still is, but very in-depth, very full of text and UI stuff. Even today, and Nobunaga's Ambition Online just came out for PS4 here in Japan, where it's an MMO, and that is full of bewildering UI. But yeah, here's the deal. You have a budget, you've got to build up your military might, and I guess my job is to crush the Americans. And the Americans' job is to kind of hold out and gradually push for independence. So I will ask the Lord of Sandwich for support. What assistance do you need from our fleet? Like ham and cheese, thanks. Attack. Let's attack. Let's have some excitement straight off the bat. Let's attack the north. We'll be there. And Secretary for War. The north. I'm going to attack it. Thanks. Okay. Right. Yeah. Oops. This one? Yeah. You see, this is one of those things where, I mean, Koei's simulations are incredibly in depth, and really have a lot of fans. But they're the sort of things where, you know, if you're a foreigner coming into Koei stuff and you get given a Japanese Koei game, and you know, you just wind up going pressing randomly on choices, such as is the level of reading beyond New, and then you wind up with the game in English, and you're like, do I need help and masteries? Yeah, or one, do. I have no idea. Presumably this is all stuff that's in the manual. I hope so. So I'm saving, seem to be saving some money there. And then you see a boat go along, and this isn't the best way to show this game off, for sure. And it was the same thing with Final Fantasy VI. You know, pithy internet videos such as these, even, you know, this, our extensive monthly look at retro games. This isn't the best way to explore these games, but I'm sure even if I had the time, I would have difficulty processing what's going on. Okay. It's a boat. When do we get to shoot stuff? This is, I mean, but this is also interestingly coming at around about the same time. I think it was a little bit later that Sid Meier brought out colonization, which was obviously a similar topic, with more of a sort of a civilization style 4X approach rather than primarily the military approach that this has. But this is still politically in depth, and you're about writing pamphlets and things. And I haven't been paying attention just when I've been talking to you, as I've been playing that, but those people seem happy with the newspapers, and got some support, so that's probably good. No, go back. Military. Battle, let's battle. Let's see what happens. Portsmouth, Boston. Let's go here. I think that's already, I can't do that. Yeah, Portsmouth. Let's see. Hillary Clinton. I have her. I have all of them. Are jolly goods. Oops. Yeah, sure. You know, it's like this, you need rations for a certain amount of days. I don't know how many rations they eat in one day. 454, sounds good. All the powder. Thanks, we're going hell for leather here. All the money as well. Well, most of the money. Yep, sounds okay to me. Oh, cool. And yeah, so when you actually do go into battle, there's hex-based combat to kind of take care of, so that's cool as well. So you move people to where you want them to be, and yeah. And it's not exactly the most visually exciting of things, but you know, wow, I have no idea what's going on there. Crikey. Let's take you, move you up. And, yeah, you're done. So yeah, there's a simple sort of turn-based strategy element to things, as well as the sort of more political side and managing your troops in between, and that's all awesome. But I think like the problem with it is Koei games in general and have been, you know, as they have been for 20, 30 years, is that it's largely, and even this, even Liberty or Death has a significantly improved UI over sort of previous games that they've done on the Super Famicom and the Famicom, you know, in fact. Can attack or bayonet? What's the difference? Attack. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of these games do feel extremely dry, but yeah, there's a lot of depth here. It's just that this was completely forgotten. You know, I think Stitch you. I think that was a little bit buggy. Well, there you go. In Japan, like, all of these games do have... I think in the West there's an extremely cult following for these, but I think in Japan there is a cult following for, you know, Nobunaga's Ambitions and Revenge of the Three Kingdoms, because, I mean, they are such long-running series. And you almost get the feeling that from Koei's end, the Shinsegoku Musou Dynasty Warriors, it's something that they do so that they can make more of these weird games. So you can entrench people and, I don't know, help the other guys out. You get shot at. I think there was poor troop placement at the beginning because of this river that my guys can't cross. But I do have naval support because I put all my money into this thing, and that's going to help. But yeah, I think from the Japanese end, it was like, well, no, they weren't really interested in. Awesome. So you can kind of push them away with that move. That's quite neat. I think from the Japanese market's end, it was like, well, not really interested in playing through American history as opposed to Japanese history. And from the American market's end, it was, well, I don't want to play history, I want to shoot stuff, thanks. So that's why, it's, as I said, a massive curio. Dig in, son. There you go. So this was what it meant by watching battles, I think, when I started the game out here. It's all about like these little animations that are taking even more time. I'm just gonna have him run through the mountains, but I'm pushing these guys back quite far. And what happens if I head into this castle? Take it over. No, you're done at that point. Okay. Get him. My goodness, everybody has such high health. It's like the first battle in the game as well. Yeah, ludicrously long fights for everything, and I don't think I have the time, and I'm sure you don't have the time to continue with this, but an interesting little game, Liberty or Death, from April of 1994. So the console world of April 1994 was dominated by a big role-playing sequel, and it was kind of the case in computers as well, as Heimdall 2 was the big April 94 release on Amiga. This thing takes a monster 7 floppy disks, as we shall see in a second. And actually it came out alongside a CD32 version, and that was often kind of the attraction for CD32 at this point. Basically the games themselves were kind of rubbish, but hey, at least you didn't have to swap discs, for what was pretty much the same game. So yeah, you had to sort of rifle through and see pictures of discs, at least charmingly wooden and bolted down, as you can see there, before you carried on. So Heimdall 2 and Heimdall are sort of isometric role-playing games. And yeah, and they're all about sort of taking a party of characters around different islands, and the whole game is built around Norse mythology. So you start off in the ether here, and basically I played this for a while without having a clear idea of what really to do, even with instructions in front of me. Partly because there's a bizarre system where you use, oh my goodness, yeah, where you can switch between characters for a start, but if you want to switch between characters, you have to swap discs again just to load the other character into memory. Jeez. But yeah, there's a bizarre system where you use the joystick controls to move and fight, and the mouse to sort of explore the top pane of the screen there, which lets you manage your inventory and whatnot. But yeah, you pick stuff up here, and basically you sort of manage to move on into the next sort of area. And the big problem I had was just kind of figuring out how all of its systems worked. There's a sort of spell crafting system that you can sort of arrange these magical runes and symbols to create spells, but this is really early on in the game, so you know, it's hard to figure out what to do. And yeah, plenty. The main problem was, you know, coming in and it saying hit me, and figuring out just how to manage your inventory. So I actually had a weapon to play with for the longest time. Couldn't figure that stuff out. But you know, I moved on, and you can sort of choose to go to different areas on the map. So after a bit of clunking and clicking, I wind up at the castle, and it's like, oh, you can't come in here without a pass. This is something that isn't explicitly explained to you, and these days, of course, you are more directed, but it's all the more frustrating when you have a game built around going back and forth to, you know, obtain items and then head back the other way. When you were swapping floppy disks, it was immensely frustrating to do that shit. So yeah, I mean, Heimdall 2 basically starts out with an awful lot of wandering around and not really being clear on what to do, and then getting into scraps, and even with the sword equipped, and pressing the attack button, not really being able to attack for whatever reason. So you know, that's annoying, and yeah, even though you have different options available to you, like sword and longbow, and your magic attacks, it seems Heimdall here just does whatever he wants to do anyway, and primarily it turns out he just wants to die. There are quest givers around. You go into bars, you have a look around. Generally the presentation's fairly decent, and you know, this was obviously built around the CD32 and the A1200, so you know, cartoonish graphics and things like that. Core, if you remember a couple of months ago, in this video had put out Bubba and Sticks, which was a hugely unimpressive platformer, but did look very cartoony and slick, and this was their style at the time. So yeah, you're seeing here, I finally figured out how to attack people with my sword. So I can sort of try and do him in, but I'm getting absolutely slaughtered. Heimdall can guard as well, apparently, but I couldn't get that done whatsoever. And then I'd move back and go, oh, I can probably take out him now, and oh no, I can't. All of a sudden my sword's not working. And well, at least I can go back to that weird sort of obelisk that was around before, and where it says hit me, I can actually try and hit it. But no, no, I can't. So that was my shitty experience with Heimdall 2 in a nutshell. Yeah, let's move on to our last game. Rounding up our April 1994, and the big problem with I don't know, not bearing the lead is we started off with Final Fantasy VI and we ended with Apocalypse on the Amiga. Not that it's bad, but this is hardly ending us off with a bang, except for the bangs within the game. This is a shoot 'em up by Miracle Software, who, as far as I can tell, didn't really do anything except for Apocalypse on the Amiga. You're part of an elite that's been chosen to fly a mission, it seems. And whoops, yep, let's insert discs. Pictures of floppy disks. Those were quite the thing back in the day. Now, I take it that you are this guy, the square-headed chap, but he's just taken his helmet off. He's about to fly in a helicopter. He's just taken his helmet off. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need helmets. True heroes don't need helmets. Rescue at least 20. Oh, hostages, right. So Apocalypse is effectively Choplifter for the new generation when the new generation was the old generation. And helicopters and NAM, because that hadn't been exploited in video games that much. Basically, Apocalypse, it's Choplifter, which, if you remember, the original arcade game, and then being ported to all sorts of systems. Very, very good port on the on Sega's Master System. Was it Sega Arcade? I think it was. It's a game where you fly around in a helicopter and find people to rescue in a helicopter, and not try and shoot this anti-aircraft gun to no effect. Let's forget about that. But yeah, Choplifter, you had to fly around the place, pick up prisoners of war, then take them back to your camp. And so in Apocalypse, you can land, as I'm doing here, but there's nobody in this bit. So that helicopter's going to come down and shoot me up. And I go, oh, I'm going to start that again. And not be quite so embarrassing this time. It looks nice for the era, although the audio presentation is pretty weak. There's no music going on or anything like that, and there generally isn't that much going on. But this is the first level here, so I don't know. My patience was being tested, just getting through this first very drab and very empty level, and I think that was what happened with Apocalypse in general. I see. I baited him in. Thought, I'm gonna get an idea. No, I'm gonna take off. Shoot you up. You see. It was echoed in the reviews, which were really, really mixed at the time, and some places quite liked it and enjoyed this sort of. This new-ish take on Choplifter, and a lot of people are saying, well, this is basically the same as Choplifter, and it's not very good. That's the thing. It's whoops, that was dumb. You can sort of see the deconstructivist approach coming back to this 20 years on, but then sort of playing a rejiggered thing as part of a video looking at old games. It's I don't know, it puts you in a strange position. You can't view things in the same context, because of course this is old, but it's an old game based on an even older game. But these people run on, and then they run off, and then you do well, and you win, and that's basically Apocalypse. And there's rockets in it. Weird control system, because Amiga games you only had one fire button, so you have to double tap the button in order to shoot rockets and stuff, and then hold it to fire your guns, and then you fly into a hill, and then you die. And that's Apocalypse on the Amiga, and that's he's taking his helmet off. He's alright. That's our look at gaming history for April 1994. Check out the full feature at kaijupod.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.